These were people who their lifestyle, their choice was gay, but they were not participating in what would be known as the fast-track lifestyle. They were not taking drugs. They did have sex, frequently multiple sexual partners. Some had had sexually transmitted diseases, but nothing at all remotely associated with what we call AIDS. And to me, that meant that if my hypothesis was right, that it was in the lifestyle, the overwhelming of the body's immune system with amyl nitrate and KY jelly and many at times cocaine to get, a lot of people use cocaine thinking that it was a natural high to get them through the night. Alcohol and smoking, sleep deprivation, massive parasitic infections, yeast infections, which were absolutely endemic in that movement, that if you reversed all that, you should get these people back to a state of health. So with Dr. Chiesa, I started a health modification program. Hundreds upon hundreds of individuals were involved in it, and they were put on a vegetarian diet, no alcohol, no caffeine, no artificial sweeteners, no sugars, which feed the yeast. They had to get a good night's sleep. They could have all the sex that they wanted, but they couldn't have unprotected sex, and they couldn't have unhealthy sex where they exposed themselves or their partner to some form of pathogen. They couldn't take any drugs. They took a lot of supplements. Some had intravenous vitamin drips and other modalities, autohemotherapy, meditation, stress management, and counseling. At the end of about 13 months, all those that participated had made remarkable improvements. Now here's what's important. And there was only one journalist that I could find in the United States interested in this, Tony Brown, the award-winning, highly respected journalist who has a program, the Tony Brown's Journal, on PBS. He invited me to bring these individuals with their medical records showing that they had had full-blown AIDS, that they had only done lifestyle modification, and that they had made the turnaround or improvement. In many cases, full reversal. Now, when I say full reversal, I mean there was no HIV or antibody, there was no pathology at all in their body. None of the 30 designated conditions we call AIDS were present. These people had returned to a normal and vital life. And we had meticulous medical documentation because every month they had to have a full set of blood workups done. And we examined those blood workups and viral loads and everything else. Some of these people, and by the way, no one was charged a penny for any of this. This was all done free. And some of these people were coming into the center 5 days a week, sometimes for 3 to 4 hours. And it was interesting that we put a press release out to at least have an open dialogue to exchange ideas, nothing more, with the mainstream medical community to show that there are people using lifestyle modification and making improvements. There was never this attempt, ever, to tell people don't take the drugs, because I'm a big believer in freedom of choice. There was never a sense of denying AIDS. To the contrary, I can't tell you how many thousands of hours of illnesses and helping them with the illnesses they had, which were very real. But so too was their recovery. So too was the remarkable turnaround. And what was unique was how many of the people who, before they came into this lifestyle modification program, had been in the traditional AIDS support groups, of which there were hundreds, if not thousands. And one person's story was representative of many. They stopped going to the groups because the group members were uncomfortable with the idea that they weren't taking the drugs. Now, they weren't advocating other people not take the drugs, but they were advocating the other people take a healthier lifestyle. And it was interesting how many people were still engaged in an unhealthy lifestyle at the same time taking the unhealthy drugs. And as one man said, he had more than 2,000 people in his health support groups or his AIDS support groups in the 5 years before he joined this one, all of whom died. And he said in one group there were over 80 people and every single one died. And he said, do you know what it means when you keep going back and seeing less people and more people dying and realizing you're not? And yet at no point could we get anyone from the National Institutes of Health, anyone at the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease, no one was interested in what we were doing. There was nothing to sell. We were doing what we were doing for free. Our time and energy and counseling and therapeutic models were donated. But there was an enormous backlash by some of the more radical elements within the fast-track gay community. They wanted drugs only. They felt that anyone advocating lifestyle was in denial of AIDS. Not true, but that was their position. And they had the political power to influence legislators, influence public health policy, influence the medical paradigm. And I was just amazed at how there was such a lack of compassion and reason and openness. But that's the way it went. And then I couldn't find any doctors at the time or scientists willing to examine this, except for Kaiser and Dr. Martin Feldman and a few others. And along the way, one by one, over a long period of time, because I can remember when you couldn't find 5 dissident scientists in the United States that would go public. They looked at the evidence. They looked at the evidence and said, how could a virus that we can't find in someone's blood be killing people? And why would we give a very powerful drug, so powerful like AZT, that it can't even be used in cancer? That's where it was originally intended. How could we possibly allow that to be used in AIDS, where people are already sick? If you give a decimated immune system, AZT, you could kill the person. And indeed, people were dying like flies. And yet the medical community refused to change this paradigm. The medical community continued to believe that if they're dying, it's because of AIDS, not because of the treatment, therefore give them even more treatment, even more drugs. And I consider this a form of madness. I was embarrassed at the scientific community and the medical community. And then, slowly but surely, we began to see more and more scientists arrive at the same or similar conclusions. So today, the medical community has not cured a single person using its paradigm. We have. If you go to Tony Brown's journal, take a careful look at all the people that we brought on. Their medical records are there, their stories are there, their testimonials are there. When we invited all members of the American press, 7,000 members of the American media were invited to a press conference to meet 100 people who were long-term survivors of AIDS, who had made remarkable improvements with their physicians, no one showed up, not a single member of the American media.
Repeat that, there was a little static burst.
We held a press conference that took nearly a year to convene, where 100 individuals from around the United States, using different modalities, but all natural, non-toxic, came together with their physicians, with their medical records, and with a very esteemed group of scientists to discuss this. 7,000 members of the American media were invited. Not one showed up. They were invited on 3 occasions. They still did not show up. So my question then is, what does the American media fear? What did the AIDS establishment scientists fear? In a democratic society, you should also have democracy in science. When science becomes orthodox, it ceases to be science. We need a non-orthodox scientific community. Anything you say today, the first thing a journalist is going to do is call the National Cancer Institute or call one of the AIDS experts who will say that's all nonsense, you don't know what she's talking about. They won't even bother to look at your documentation. That's how much fear they have. So needless to say, they are the protectors of the entire orthodoxy. And yet, this is he has 40 years of experience, unblemished record.